Hi, everyone. Welcome to the second installment of the lecture series.
So we're joined by Jean-François Lemay, who's talking about the virtual and the real today. Yeah, that's about it. We'll hand it off to him.
Yeah, thank you for coming, and we hope you enjoy.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you to Augustas, Arjun, Abdul, the RUAS, and the University of Reading for inviting me tonight to speak on the subject of the virtual and the real, which is a subject I chose with, talking with Augustas, to talk about what I do on a daily basis in my practice in London as an architect, and also to capture some ideas that I've had over the years and tell you a bit of my background as an architect, which may be useful for you as architecture students. So, how did I become an architect? Why did I get into architecture? When I was a kid, there were these two games that had come out, which at the time were the best-selling of their time. It was Myst, came out, was like one of the first CD-ROM games, and after that, 4 years later, they released a sequel called Riven. And the thing about these games is that you didn't shoot anything. It wasn't like Doom or anything, which was around the same time, Doom 1, Wolfenstein 3D. This was just about clicking and exploring a place. And although I did play Doom and etc., I enjoyed that. It was different. It was not about killing anything. It was just about, oh, look how nice the images are. Look how nice the place is. And I want to communicate that to you a little bit. So Augustas, if you could put the first audio clip. So Riven, when it came out in 1997, was groundbreaking. It had been rendering, for years on Silicon Graphics workstations using Softimage and Mental Ray. And what they created here was a whole series of islands and puzzles. And I want to show it to you so you realize how architectural this is. Think about it, none of this exists, right? So some guys and girls are spending years designing this in some place in, west coast of the US, creating this from zero. And yet what they create is a very, very experiential experience of place type of thing. You're going up this staircase, there's music. In the real game, you'd be hearing birds and sounds, like you feel it's hot. It's the summer. And this is the music that was composed for the game as well. Textures, everything is kind of captured from the real world and put into this video game. And then you go from this clearing, which is very, very sunny, it feels hot, and then you go into this deep jungle, and the creators of the game are very, very conscious about things like light, contrast, space, compression of space, atmosphere, etc. And then this journey through this jungle takes you to a totem of a fish, which is a very important, a kind of whale, which is a very important element in the game. So you can see how vastly different this is from like a shoot 'em up game. This is really about experiencing the place kind of thing. And there was no one in my family who was an architect, so I didn't know about things like experience of the place, but I knew I liked this, So if you could stop the, thank you. So, I wanted to become a video game designer. And then, this is Montreal, my hometown. I'm not showing the prettiest picture of it, right? I'm showing the daily experience of my hometown. For better or for worse, in the 60s, in the advent of highways and everybody had to get around quickly, they built this elevated highway that just cut across the city, and it's ugly, and you can't really get rid of it. The reason why they didn't bury it, by the way, is that there are sewer pipes, and they would have had to basically divert all the city's sewers. So they're like, oh, let's just elevate it. So now we're stuck with it, So what I was thinking around that time is like, gosh, the game is really nice, but the city is really it needs help. And there's a lot of places in North America and in Europe and all over the world, that you're walking through the city and you're like, oh my God, this is really awful, you know? And so the question for me was game designer, cinema designer, or reality designer, you know, like from beautiful, sunny, blue sky, or highway underpass, you know? And I chose reality because I was concerned that I might otherwise spend years of my life doing something that's really, really beautiful, and then it gets locked on a CD somewhere, or today it'd be just a digital file, and then if no one double clicks it, no one sees it again, you know? Whereas when you invest in your life in reality, it's a lot more gritty and sometimes boring and maybe not as beautiful, but it's for real. It's for what we do with the body every day. We walk through the city, and is the city beautiful or is it awful? And it's not going to become beautiful by itself. We need to help it, you know? So my journey was to do the bachelor at McGill University in my hometown. In second year, I did Erasmus equivalent at the School of Architecture of Paris-Belleville in Paris. And I would recommend to all of you to do an Erasmus or whatever remains of that after Brexit, because it was the time of my life. I mean, you learn so much when you travel and you go to other schools, different languages, different culture, etc. And I did my master's at the Architectural Association. So what I want to talk to you about today is what's the difference between cinema and game stuff and architecture? And essentially they start the same. Somebody has an idea, and then we use the same software, whatever, 3D Studio Max, anything, to illustrate it. But the cinema and the game people are very good at it. They're going to spend everything they have, money, etc., time, best artists, to illustrate it, because they know it's not going to go further, right? That's it. The image, whatever the film, the DVD, that's where it stops, right? We architects are okay at doing nice graphics, you know, but it's fine because we're like, okay, but this is like just to sell the idea. You know, afterwards, it gets built, and then it's in real use, right? So that's the difference between virtual and real. Architecture crosses from virtual to real. Cinema doesn't, at least according to this graph. And maybe let's talk a little bit about what's virtual, you know. Being such in power, force, or effect, though not actually expressly such. What does that mean, you know? It's like it's got all the attributes of the real without being real. And when you look at virtus, the Latin word that it comes from, it talks about virile qualities of man, but it also talks about courage, valor, and basically virtu, the virtue of something, is the strength of something. When something is virtual, it is strong, except in one way. It doesn't exist yet. So it has all the strength of reality without the reality. So I want to compare two things that came out at the same time. The Return of the King won like, whatever, 11 Oscars or something. And The Gherkin, which won the Sterling Prize for Foster and Partners. And I want to just think about what's the difference between them. Obviously, one of them is a DVD, you know, and the other is a building, right? But the DVD, like the game I've just shown you, is profoundly architectural. And this is a beautiful illustration by the English illustrator Alan Lee. And Augustus, if you could put the second clip, I think we should take a moment to watch this again. You've probably seen it 1,000 times, like me. fantastic, right? I guarantee you that some former architecture students worked on that, for sure. Maybe some architects, right? Okay, so none of it is real, right? You can't go to New Zealand, and you might be able to see some bits of it, like set bits, but it doesn't exist, right? And I would say, nobody really thinks they're actually going to make it back. Actually, some people want to create Minas Tirith, but they're deluded, right? Because there's a reason why we don't live in that kind of city anymore, right? We have cars. Right? We have a different relationship between the city and agriculture, which this is showing you a medieval relationship between fields and city, which we don't have anymore, you know? And there's all kinds of reasons why this is not buildable, and yet it looks totally real. I mean, not buildable according to our society in the 21st century. So this one, though, that I'm comparing to is real, right? And it might not be as exciting, or it might be more exciting, depends who you ask. And I kind of want to ask you, which one do you think is going to last longer, right? The DVD or the Swiss Re, right? Now, this is referring to something that you may have covered in your history courses, this notion of this will kill that, which is an extract from Notre-Dame de Paris, this book, or The Hunchback of Notre Dame in English, this book by Victor Hugo. And in this chapter, suddenly the action stops, and the Archdeacon of Notre Dame says to the person he's talking to at the time, he says, this will kill that. And then Victor stops and he says, okay, let me explain to you what he might have meant by saying that, my character. What could have been the thought concealed beneath those enigmatic words of the Archdeacon? The book will kill the edifice. The tower will crumble. The press will kill the church, right? But by extension, it meant printing will kill architecture. Why? Well, that's because Notre-Dame de Paris is set around the time of the first printed Bible. This is an example of it that's in the New York Public Library, Gutenberg's 42-line Bible. And Notre-Dame was built 200 years before, or more, with incredibly ornate rose windows and sculptures and everything you want, right? Why? Because nobody knew how to read, and even if people had known how to read, there were no books, right? Making a book was extremely difficult and costly. So suddenly, the Archdeacon of Notre Dame says, oh, when people start reading, they won't need a very ornate church, because they can just read the Bible themselves. And of course, the Bible was, perhaps still is, the most printed book, and it was certainly the first. What he says is that it's so much easier to carry a book than a cathedral, right? You can just take it with you, right? And if you lose it or whatever, you can just write a new one, print a new one. Costs nothing, almost, as soon as you have paper and etc. The cathedral is kind of clumsy, heavy, and fixed. However, in retrospective, it's not clear that this will kill that. For sure, cinema, video games, books, all of that have taken story away from architecture. So we don't need to print the walls with like stories anymore, because we can just read about them or watch them on Netflix, right? But both of them are extremely vulnerable. And the jury is still out as to which one is going to last, right? Because Notre Dame just burnt, right? For the first major fire, its most important fire since 800 years, right? And it will be rebuilt. And what happens when this happens, right? All those people who did Minas Tirith in The Lord of the Rings, they spent so many years on it. What happens when we lose the file, right? Or like, oh yeah, 50 years from now, what's that, a DVD? Who's got a DVD player, right? Or is it available on Netflix? No, okay. What do we do if there's some kind of like major hard drive failure, And suddenly we just lost it, as is documented in films like Blade Runner 2049. The loss of culture due to some celestial event, that wipes out all the hard drives. So frankly, it's not clear which one's more durable, the book or the building, or the DVD or the building, So that's just a bit of groundwork. I want to tell you a little bit about my career. Between the bachelor and the master's, I worked for Moshe Safdie and Architects. After that, I worked for 9 years for Norman Foster, or Foster and Partners as it's called, and in 2019 I started my own thing. I want to tell you about 4 projects today. 2 of them from Foster's that I worked on, and 2 of them from my own office. And I say case studies in the transition from virtual to real, also known as projects. Right? Okay, the first project I worked on at Foster's, apart from a quick competition when I came in, was the Bloomberg headquarters in the City of London. And this was great because I was actually working on something that was actually going to get built, which, a lot of people are languishing in offices because they're doing competitions and they never get built, So it was great to have the opportunity to work on something real. And when you join the office, you usually have one day that you actually meet Norman Foster for like 10 seconds when you get to present your graduation project at the graduate show. So this was me at the time. Okay, so Bloomberg was a huge amount of work for a lot of people. And I just need to state that all the material that I'm showing here tonight in the Foster and Partners sections is copyright Foster and Partners and is being used only for academic purposes. After years of work and bankruptcies of developers and a project with Jean Nouvel and etc., finally, Mr. Bloomberg, the owner of the Bloomberg Terminals financial thing, arrives and says he's going to make it his building. And I'm just the new guy in the office, and I'm like, oh, I can do some renderings and all kinds of things, So they're like, okay, you have to do some renderings. So there was this image. We were preparing the planning application, and I was like, well, okay, so this is what it looks like. At the time, we were going to use Portland stone, which is the same one as this little Christopher Wren church across. I think I spent like a week masking out that tree, That's what you do in an office, right? How do you do that? And those 3 trees are still there. And this is, you put some people and then bang, And they've survived, which is actually amazing. And this is what it looks like. In the end, they switched to stone color. This was another one. And those renderings went actually straight into the planning application. So I helped to deliver the planning for this building. A minor achievement when you've just joined an office, but I was very happy. So this is what it looks like now. Bloomberg also won the Sterling Prize in 2017, which is the highest distinction for a building in this country. And, do I love it? I don't know. Yeah, it's the mass of a building, absolutely massive. In terms of footprint, and I'm not sure about the color and everything. I let you form your own opinion. I invite you to go see it. It's supposed to be the most sustainable office building in the world, even though it has thousands of tons of granite imported from India and bronze made in Japan. But we're not going to go there. I just wanted to mention this evening that I had a moment of virtuality where I did some renderings, and it became a reality. And the next project I want to talk to you about is Oceanwide. So this competition comes into the office. I'm working on Bloomberg. And they're like, can you help on the competition? And at the time, I found Bloomberg a bit frustrating, so I said yes. I worked really, really hard, and then we won, right? Skyscraper in San Francisco. Second tallest site zoned, right? The tallest one being the one that was already built or under construction by Cesar Pelli. And so we were going to have the one that can be the second tallest. And this is very on purpose by the city. They had created these 3 sites like a podium, gold, silver, and bronze, So we got the silver podium, right? And this is bronze, by the way. This one. And so it doesn't exist, right? This is a rendering. So you could say, how did you come up with this architecture? This is 5 years of my life. I can't possibly tell you all of the people who worked on it and all the reasons why we ended up with this interesting shape. But the part I can tell you about is the one I was in charge of or responsible for as an associate, which means as a, fairly low down the ladder in this company, which was the public space at the base, right? The city had said, if you're going to do a building here, for every square foot of office space, well, for every 50 square feet of office space, we want 1 square foot of public space. Now imagine you've got 30 floors of office space. So how do you find all that public space, right? So we could have put it on the roof or something, but then it means the public would have had to go up lifts and stuff, and we were like, no way. So we put it at ground floor. right? But who wants to go in a public space when you have a building above your head, right? So we said we're going to lift it. So we took the datum of those existing buildings, which were built right after the earthquake of 1906. This is like the oldest buildings that remain in San Francisco, more or less, right? And we said, let's strike a line, and then that's going to be where our building starts. And below that is just a public space that we call the urban room. And in those sketches by Narinder Sagu, the Department of Illustration at Foster & Partners, were showing that we were going to put the heart, the public heart, under the skyscraper. The heart symbol is very common at Foster's, where you always put heart, right? It's like, this is where it's going to be happy, right? So we were doing these models, first scale 1 to 250 or 200 renderings, not done by me, done by other people, but as an architect, then you're really just coordinating all the 3D models and making sure everything gets made by the model makers and drawn by the design team. It was very important for us to have food in there, the whole thing, right? It had to be amazing. Trees, maybe LED on the ceiling with water, I built this model with a couple of guys out of foam board with this cutting machine that's automated, a lot of fun. Put a tiny projector because I wanted to project on the ceiling. So basically this thing was shaping up. Now 2.5 years have passed, right? And all the urban things have been done. And we're showing the vegetation and the trees, And okay, so we're in San Francisco, we're preparing for a big presentation to the city to convince them to let us build the project. That's planning application or pre-planning. And this is Stefan Bailing, Norman, David Summerfield, and David Nelson. And we were walking around. And so the city said, we are really interested in this idea of a plaza under a skyscraper, but we want to see it, right? So Augustus, if you could put the next video. So this is a really interesting case of a city planners, politicians, asking for a virtual reality simulation of what they're going to get, right? So we order from a company in China called Action for £30,000 a video, right? 2 minutes where they're going to walk us through the thing, right? And okay, this is not cinema quality. You can see some of the people look a bit dodgy. I'm just going to let you watch it. This is what it looked like, parking lot, and we were going to have a little pocket park here. We turned the street so it wouldn't go through our public space. So the street was going to come out here. This would be a new hotel for the city, 5-star, Waldorf Astoria, Hilton. This is what the street looks like, or looked like. And we were going to turn it to the right, you see? And then these bollards would come down only for fire trucks, if necessary. So there's a lot of work in something like that. Lord Foster presented it to the city in what is really like a courtroom environment, by the way. It's a public hearing. The city loved it, and we got planning approval, which means we can build this $1.5 billion project, right? So we were very happy at the time. And you'll notice it's all about the public space. It's as if the city doesn't care about the skyscraper. They're certainly not interested in knowing how luxurious the apartments are at the top of the tower, which is why I'm not showing them to you today. Besides, it's not the part I was working on. So the city was only interested in what they were going to get as a public space and the shape of the tower, how it was going to look on the skyline. And we convinced them with a virtual reality, which is what architects do. We went down to the detail of celebrating a jeans manufacturer, which was a competitor of Levi's, Levi's being from San Francisco. They had a competitor on our site in the past, and we documented that. I developed this glass screen for one of the ends. We considered redstone at some point because we wanted the room to feel more warm. So suddenly it was all about redstone, and then the client didn't like it. So we went back to the old thing, I designed with other people, this is kiosk and food and beverage. So basically, after like 4 years of like 80 hours a week, not every week, but a lot of weeks were very, very hard, right? We ended up with something that was very ready to be built. We had this big model, which we used in the office to do reviews, which I drew, which was actually a lot of work. And it was very helpful. And then I remember in August 2018 going to present these new views with my bosses, of course, to the client in San Francisco. And at this point, we've got the type of flower nailed down, This is how detailed it gets, right? The signage. Every sign that's going to be installed is designed and ready, The desk, a food and beverage kiosk was very important for me. We needed to have a kitchen. If you don't have a kitchen, you're not able to serve food. If you're not serving food, you're not going to get an alcohol license. And no booze means no fun, right? So I wanted to be able to have a beer. I was like, what kind of project are we going to have? We're not able to have a beer in the urban room. So we got the kitchen. We had this little bandstand, etc. And down to the detail of how does the kitchen work with the kiosk, right? The kitchen's down there, kiosk's up there. How do you get the plates up and down? Well, you have a dumbwaiter, takes the plate up and down, right? And you have a stair, of course, for the waiters to actually go down to the kitchen. So this is the level of detail. And the reception desk as well. And then two things happen around that time. The first one is the team in London was invited to go to San Francisco to relocate there and be on site, which was a big opportunity. But the second thing that happened to me more personally is that I got passed over for a promotion. One of my friends got promoted and I didn't. And I had been giving my life to this project for 4 years, right? And it was a heartbreak. I was basically married to this project. I was like, my friend who got promoted was very good. She's very good. But I was like, why her, not me? So then I thought, well, okay, so I'm going to reconsider my future. And this is around the time when I finally got my British passport, because I'm Canadian, right? So I thought, okay, when I get my British passport, I can leave Foster's, because previously they were my sponsor, right, for my visa. So I said to the hierarchy, I said, I'm not going to go to San Francisco. I'm going to stay in London. And I planned my way out by developing some furniture, which unfortunately I can't talk about today. But actually, sometimes something that comes across to you that is kind of a shock to the system will wake you up and make you wonder, what is it that I want in life? I've always wanted to have my own office. And then actually it turns out I dodged a bullet, right? Because here's what happens at the start of the pandemic, and there are more articles, and whoops, right? The ground floor is built, the cranes are up, it's all going to go up, and then, imperiled project, what's wrong? And they said it's because of COVID, but it was a Chinese client, and we were like, okay, it can't just be because of COVID. Then, a couple of months later, the contractor files a $108 million bond on the site because they haven't been paid, right? And Foster's was owed $1.5 million in fees as well. Basically, they weren't paying. And the contractor was like, well, who's going to pay us for all the work we did, right? And then the state of California files some lawsuit on the site, which means that whoever buys the site has to first pay back the debts that are tied to the site. That's what a lien is. Okay, so then the site is seized by creditors. Really bad. And okay, so now the contractor can't, the original client can't even pay the security guards anymore, right? And then the news from last week, the client's getting evicted from their office. That's how bad it is, right? That happens a lot, right, in architecture. So something that me and like at least 50 other architects and 100 other consultants and hundreds of contractor people have worked on for the best part of, for me, 5 years and others for longer. Something that we have put so much energy in, that we have sacrificed so much, will probably never be built. There are people at Foster's who spent their weekends and evenings choosing door handles, taps, floor finishes, making sure the apartments would be absolutely amazing. And what are they going to get, right? Nothing. They got their salary, right? But who cares, right? Because we don't work for money. Okay, we need money, right? But like, if I said to you, how about you spend 5 years designing a project, it's never going to get built, but I'm going to pay you some salary. I think most architects would be like, well, why can't they just work on one that actually is going to get built, right? Because that's what drives us, I think. Otherwise, you'd go for the video game choice, right? As architects, we actually want to see it built. So this is what happens, right? Okay, it was on its way to reality, and then who knows if somebody's going to buy it? If somebody buys it, are they going to build the same project we designed? Probably not. This is way too expensive anyway. Maybe that's what bankrupted the client. Maybe it's our fault, right? So anyway, many architectural projects fully designed are never built. Some are built and then demolished. All that remains is the virtual reality, right? So when I left Foster's, the same boss who had passed me over for promotion actually, became a lifeline because he provided 2 projects. And so the lesson, never burn bridges, right? First, through his wife, who runs a very good gallery, Christine Helligard, runs a gallery in London, and one of her artists from Iran was invited to do a solo show at the Barbican Center. And she wanted to do a star. And this is all they had. The artist said, here's the idea, it's a star, and she found this image on the internet. And she was like, can we make it as big as possible? Like, she was like, how about 5 meters diameter? And then my former boss calls me and he's like, can you help, So first I fired up 3D Studio Max and I was like, well, what is it? Because it has a tool to do some polyhedra really easily. I was like, is it that or that? She chose that one. So first we did the 3D print, the size of this, the size of a 2-pound coin. And that was enough to convince the curator at the Barbican to say, okay, let's do it. And then they were like, okay, tell us more. I was like, okay. So it's got facets, right, 2 types. And then they were like, right, more. And I was like, okay, well, it's probably this, right? And then you chop it, you extend, becomes a star, you extend all of them, chop the middle, you get that, right? And then here's an exploded view, and you could do it with some kind of frame. Looks like a mess, right? What if we rotate it? Oh, actually, if you rotate them, it actually works. Okay, thicken them, doesn't look so good. Rotate them again, thicken them again, chop them. Okay, maybe it looks better. And then this is what kind of it looks like. And then they said to me, great, let's build it. Let's build a model. I was like, okay. So, I was getting a bit of work during the pandemic. Kept me alive, along with other projects. And so 9mm plywood, scale 1:8. How is it going to come together? Doing all of these graphics and the CNC files. And turns out this thing was highly modular and flat pack. And so here it is in my bedroom. And I wanted to build 2 models, actually. One of them, well, frankly, it was because the CNC shop messed up one of them, and they gave me the scrap ones, but I was able to repair them, right? The ones that, the shop that cut the plywood. So suddenly I had 2 stars, right? So I said one of them is going to be unclad and the other one will be clad, right? Because the structure has some qualities to it. And the artist loved it, the gallery loved it, the curator loved it. So then they said, okay, now we're going to go for a 5 meter, like 10 times the size. That was going to be too expensive. Shrunk down to 4 meters, still too expensive. Shrunk down to 3 meters, still too expensive. And their budget was £45,000, right? They couldn't find a contractor. So then they turned to me and they said, what can you do? And I said, well, instead of 1 3 meter, I could build you 3 that are twice the size of that, 3 1 meter. And for a moment, they were like, okay, do it, because the deadline was coming up, right? The exhibition was going to open last September. So, can you put the 3rd video, Augusta? Sorry. During all these months of... this is the virtual reality, right? This is months of being in front of the computer and saying, when is this thing actually going to get built? Maybe never, right? So at least I'm going to have a bit of fun, right? Getting quite enamored with the visual quality of it. Anyway. So the good news is with this one, it actually did get built. I started doing the 1 meter. And then as I had started doing it, they said, oh, we found a contractor who can do the 3 meter. But, we were going to continue the 1 meter anyway. This is me with the artist, Soheila Sokanvari. She's mostly a painter, and she wanted the sculpture to, she's also a sculptor, but she wanted the sculpture to be a highlight at the end of the exhibition to compensate for the fact that her paintings would look very small, perhaps, in the big exhibition space. I'm showing these pictures, and I'm showing me in it, not to show off, but because it's important to realize at some point you're like, oh my God, I've done 95% of the work here. I've done all the drawings. I've designed all the junctions. I've actually put it together with my own hands. And it's going to have only her name on it, and I don't deny that she is the creator of this sculpture because she gives it the context. Right? If I just make it myself, people are like, okay, you made a star. In her case, it fits within her body of work, which is a reflection on Iran and film stars of Iran. But nevertheless, at the end, I considered myself less as an architect and more as a collaborator or co-creator of this thing. And we put this projector inside, and it has this amazing quality that when the lights are on, it looks like this. When the lights are off, it looks like that. And looking at the space, I was helping the curator at the Barbican to design her exhibition with these patterns she had chosen. This is how tiny the star looks, the 3 meter one, in the scale of the space. And finally, here it was, We found a company that could do it for $35,000, maybe a bit more. Left a bit of money for all the painting. And then everything about the 3 meters is the same as the 1 meter. The connections, the junctions. It's incredible when you see a rhino file just built, And here's what it looks like. And the exhibition has had very good reviews in every newspaper, and it's still on until Sunday, by the way, for those who want to see it. And it's free. So I would say this is a small virtual reality that became a reality. And the star continues to give, it has so much visual quality to it. It's very, very beautiful, actually. And I can't tell you about, I could tell you, but there's no time, but I can't tell you about Soheila's beautiful paintings, which are of women who were actresses in Iran before the revolution and who lost their star. They lost their ability to act because of the Iranian Revolution. But I do encourage you to go see it. The last project I want to tell you about today is another one that came from my former boss through his wife, through her gallery, which is that she wants to open a gallery in West Palm Beach, which is close to Palm Beach, which is where Donald Trump and John F. Kennedy and many people lived or live. So there's a lot of American, there's a lot of interest in art, there's a lot of American money. So the client came across this building, one-story building that was kind of a warehouse, and half of it, this half, was bought by another one of his friends. But he bought this side. And he said, I'm going to chop it up into 6 galleries. Not museums, but like commercial galleries, you know, where people can buy the art. And, you know, my former boss was involved because it's his wife's gallery, and he wanted to help, although he's a partner at Foster's, he wanted to help design his wife's gallery, which is very understandable. And he called me up and says, I need a bit of help with the graphics, you know. And one thing leading to another, suddenly I'm working on it kind of much more intensely. It's very residential. And then suddenly, boom, you come across this thing. And this is the half of the other client, and they've already stripped it. And this is our half, you know. And our plan for the project is very simple. It's just to have 3 entrances, each of them leading to 2 galleries. There's a ramp for wheelchair people, and there's, you know, canopy, and a white stucco render, and that's it, you know. But I guess the way, the thread that I found in this is me doing the design and the graphics. And you have no idea how powerful a simple image like this is, even though it's not that realistic, you know. So I want to tell you about, to conclude, I want to tell you about virtual reality, drawing, graphics, what architects do, and something I would call the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail is this, right? I'm sure you by now you've all heard about BIM. So BIM is this idea that you have a 3D model, and from that 3D model, the software automatically cuts your plans and your sections and your elevations. So you don't have to worry about, oh no, my section doesn't correspond to my plan anymore, right? So that's great, fantastic. But the piece that was missing was, well, what do I use to do my renderings? Because if you have to export your model and go to 3D Studio Max, then you suddenly have 2 models, one for renderings and one for the kind of more formal drawings. And that's a pain because it takes forever, and they get disconnected. And then suddenly something gets changed for the rendering, and it's not in your drawings, and it's a nightmare. Finally, V-Ray and Enscape plug into Revit, which means from one 3D model, you get everything. Line drawings, quick views, VR headset, and photorealistic rendering. And I'm not I'm not paid by them, you know, to say this to you, but I have to say it works, right? And it's really empowering, because as a one architect out there, you can do it all, you know. So from one model, I'm getting my reflected seating plan, my section perspective. A quick view from Enscape takes 10 seconds to get it out. And then when I have the time, I can let it run overnight, and I get the V-Ray one, which is more precise. All of them from one chunk of information, completely coordinated, right? I never have to worry about moving something in one, etc. And this is what it looks like now. And on the subject of virtual versus real, you know, maybe the virtual is going to look better than the real. I hope not, right? But that can happen. Because as an architect, you're like, when the client said to me, we're going to have to put this polyurethane insulation on the ceiling, to be honest, I don't really want to show it in the renderings, you know. I'm like, oh my God, you know. It's not his fault. It's no one's fault, right? It's just, that's reality. And what am I going to put on the website? Probably a mix of both, real and virtual. Because frankly, the virtual has some value. These are more virtual pictures of it, you know. V-Ray, very nice. You always get something that looks like a picture. I'm not pretending my renderings are as good as if they were done professionally, but you know, they're okay, I guess. The exterior, day and night. And from exactly the same model, I'm also getting that drawing, which is fantastic. And the framing plan, etc. And this is the external walkway under construction. So to conclude tonight, and I hope I haven't taken too much of your time and that I haven't bored you, I want to conclude going back on this idea of the virtual and the real, right? obviously I couldn't bring the headset this evening. It's plugged into the computer and, but I'll encourage you to try it because that's the future for you, right? For architecture students, for architects. Architects are always there to show a client what it's going to look like. That's our job, right? And then afterwards document it and help get it built. And you have to seduce, right? You're seducing your client. Because at first they come to your office and they're like, I don't know what's wrong, no, I've got this idea. And then they come out and they're like, it's going to be so beautiful. Because you've shown it to them. So that's the marketing power of images, but now it's no longer just images, it's also just walking through your project, even though it doesn't exist, right? Could you put the video, the last one? This is a house I'm designing in Quebec, and it's another one that I don't know if the client will be able to afford it. He's saving up his money. He is. But we're both in love with it, right? I won't talk about the project, but. This is Enscape, for those of you who use it. And you get that in, on a good computer, you get it in an hour. But let's not get too hung up on the technique, right? I think just important to remember, before the VR headset, before global illumination, CAD, blueprints, photomontage, watercolor, going back in time, before people even knew about perspective and projection, before paper, right? Before the compass and before even ink, there were architects, right? And how did they do it? The first virtual reality is to trace the building on the ground. If you were really limited to your feet and your client, as an architect, you could still do that, right? And that's still powerful to show a client, like, oh, look, here it is, right? Here's your room, right? So I'm saying this because architects have been doing this since Egypt and before, ancient Egypt. And I'm also concluding on this to talk about perhaps a little bit the fact that nothing lasts, right? It's neither the gherkin nor the DVD that's going to last. All of it will be gone, right? This is a virtual reality that will be gone at high tide, right? So we just have to embrace that fact and do our best, but I hope this is inspiring for you. Thank you very much. We have time for questions?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought I'd spoken for 2 hours or something. Augustus.
So, I guess using the virtual reality and the digital tools that architects have, is there, I guess, any sort of in the future or looking into the future, are there any more sort of tools enabling architects to design more sustainably, maybe simulating structures or I don't know, heat mapping or anything like that? Sort of.
Yeah, definitely. This idea of having one 3D model that contains all the building information is, it's an old idea and a new idea, right? It's going to take the best part of this century to fully appreciate all of the implications of that. So for the first time, you have one software out of which you're doing structural engineering, mechanical engineering, architecture, all of it, right? And in reality, it's always a bit complicated because the engineer has his own file and you have their, but nevertheless, from that software, they can do structural analysis, they can do heat, loss, sun, gains, solar gains, loss, etc. And frankly, as an architect, you're not going to do a calculation of heat loss. It's very unlikely you're going to do that, because then you get to a field which is really building science, right? And we are not trained for it. So there's a chance we would do a rubbish job and the numbers would come out would be wrong, And besides, if you were to spend your brain time to be good at this, you would not have the time to be good at that, making beautiful images. But as an architect, you still have to know how to design something that's sustainable. But I'm afraid the software is not really going to, it may help you, but I don't think the software is going to tell you, but it will help you. But you will need consultants, right? So the answer to this question is yes, software exists to optimize buildings in a sustainable world, but the people who run this software, even though it's the same software you might be using, it's probably on the engineering side. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, yes. Arjun.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. It was a really nice to kind of hear the story of how you can use Riven and kind of the grittier side, I guess, of architecture. But what was your, I can't remember the name of it, honestly, those tools that kind of create images based on keywords.
AI.
Yeah, there kind of a lot of software on the market. And how do you see them kind of fitting into, I guess, the creation of images?
Yeah.
Kind of a positive thing in having them be co-designers, or do they potentially challenge our kind of abilities to kind of, I guess, judge or control things?
Yeah. The question is about like how AI will be used in architecture, graphics, and representations, whether you could just, people are doing it, right? There are units in schools of architecture all over the world right now that are using these online tools to generate images and talk about possibilities. And there's something interesting in that. Maybe something great will come out of it. But I think it's important not to lose the fact that design is primarily about intention. Design is an intentional act. That's what the word design means, when you have designs on something. Like I have, in literature, you say, this man has designs on this woman, right? It means he fancies, right? So it means you have an intention to do something, right? So when you produce a design, you as a person are saying, this is what will be done. But when you have a thing like ChatGPT generating a piece of text or some other software or tool generating an image, I'm afraid there's a dereliction of intention. Like what's your intention? What are your thoughts? Not what the software is spitting out. Yeah? What are your thoughts? Because that's what we are worth. Frankly, the moment we say, well, myself, I don't have any thoughts, but here's what the software says, then suddenly you've lost all of your value as a designer, or as an author, or as a writer, But I'm just one person here, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who would disagree. And does that make sense?
Yeah.
Somebody has to use it. Somebody is going to take the time to discover how this thing can be used. But thankfully, architects are not going to lose their job because of AI. Not yet. Right now, the people, because it just doesn't, right now, forget it, right? The people who are threatened right now by AI is call centers, all those poor people who are answering the phone when you call the bank. They're going to be replaced by ChatGPT because it's going to be even harder to get hold of someone. That's why there's so much money being poured into it, right? In case it's not going to turn on a tangent, right? But the reason why these AI text tools and maybe image tools are so valuable to investors is because they are looking at all the people they're going to be able to fire in the customer service department, their call center in India or something. Finally, they're going to be able to replace that with some machine that's going to talk to you and give you some extremely bland answers. And you're going to be, am I talking with someone? And you're not going to know. So thankfully, architecture is not affected by that yet. Yes.
I was interested in, first of all, thank you for the presentation, it was really interesting.
Thank you very much.
I'm not an architect. I am interested in VR, I do VR research as well. Your title is about the experience of. And I always wonder that any experience that you create in VR is not the same as the experience in reality. Obviously, it's not. You wouldn't have the, I don't know, the smells or the heat or whatever. So there's always an element of curation in what it is that you're presenting to somebody. And there's quite a fine line between that and being deceitful. So the walks, when we were going through the bottom of your building past the slightly creepy avatars, presumably were designed to give the client the best view of something rather than to give the client the worst view of something.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think there's a danger in this? Do you think that virtual reality is a tool for deception? And is that a problem if it is? Because it's not the only tool of deception.
Yeah.
Artist renderings,
Yeah.
they're deceitful naturally because they all look lovely and sunny and,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. All architectural representations have the potential to be deceitful, right? Some of them are just not clear. Most clients can't read plans, to be honest. They don't understand, right? So they need visuals. But then when you do visuals, like, okay, you put the sun, it's like that perfect afternoon moment, right? And in reality, what if it's that dark morning? So, but then you wouldn't show that. Who's going to do a rendering showing the dark morning where everything's awful, right? So I think the word deceit is difficult because what we do, we convince, right? We're like getting people over the line, get them to spend all of their savings or all of their company's money. But I mean, this is what we do, right? And then they're in love with the image. So have we deceived them? Well, they wanted a building, right? We didn't convince them out of zero. They wanted a building. They wanted something. But we've seduced them. But as architects, where you become good or not good is if your image actually, when it's built, is it as nice as the image, And that I think is up to every architect. And going back to the code of conduct, the first line in the code of conduct for architects in the ARB and the RIBA, I think, is integrity, right? Not lying ever, right? Like you don't say something to a client and it turns out they're not going to get that. So there is, of course, huge potential to deceive, huge potential. But the guardian is also, humanity. People can be deceived in so many ways. Any advertising is potentially deceitful.
They would be disappointing.
They can be disappointing, yeah. It is often disappointing. But you hope that your projects are not disappointing. Otherwise your clients are not going to come back. Yes?
I just think in the virtual there's so much freedom and potential. How do you sort of ground projects, out of all this potential virtual software that you sort of make anything? How do you make something conceivable and realistic?
You mean how do you make sure it's actually buildable?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think the reason why you chose to study at an architecture school and not in film school, but you may change, right? And I'm not judging. Both are equally cool and great, right? But the reason why you chose architecture school right now is that you're interested in precisely what you've just said, right? Well, actually, how does it work, Because when you look at, it's like watching Star Wars and you're like, where are the toilets? People who work on Star Wars, they don't have the time, they're not interested in that. If they were interested in that, they would be in architecture school, right? So you're in architecture school because you're interested in okay, how does it stand, right? Where are the toilets? Where's the canteen? Where are the windows? You're still engaged with reality, what you call the ground, right? Some people have decided that they don't want to. They're like, no, it's too complicated. I'll just do the pretty picture, That's a respectable choice as well. It's just a different profession. Yes.
Going back to like seeing how like we have the virtual into like films and video games, and how in most like films and video games they sort of take you on this path and they create what like they want you to see and the experience they want you to have. But in terms of like architecture, as much as we would like to get an experience for a person, we cannot really sort of have a specific like the same sort of experience in a space like another person has. So like my question is sort of like, how do you sort of come to terms with the fact that we can't really cater for like one specific experience in the virtual reality?
Yeah. That's a very good question. Everyone will experience things differently because they have different baggage, right? San Francisco is a very interesting case for that. The city is full of homeless people. And it's full of people who work for Google and Apple who are earning a lot of money. And they're kind of stepping over each other, and they're not talking to each other. There was a lawsuit recently. Somebody wanted to open a homeless shelter, and someone who lived in the building next door sued the homeless shelter to not have it next to their house. Because they were like, I don't want this next to my house. It's going to reduce the value of my house, you know? You know, how mean is that? Because when you sue them, they have to pay for lawyers, and they don't have money, right? So when we designed the public space at the base of the tower, I liked it. I reconciled myself with it because although we have $1.5 billion of luxury above you, luxury offices, luxury houses, at least we had that little parcel that you could call a public space, and that everyone from the homeless to the billionaire is going to be able to have an experience in common. They're not going to have the same experience, right? But they are going to be able to sit on the same bench and have a coffee, maybe. I think yeah, does that answer your question? It's really difficult.
Sorry, just further to that point. Is that really the case? Presumably, if there were luxury offices directly above this public space, how quickly do you think it would turn into a sort of privately owned public space?
Yeah.
Or a VIP?
Yeah. The fact that we avoided having architectural devices like elevators and escalators means that someone who is really down and out or poor is going to feel less excluded, right? As long as they look fairly respectable and they're not coming in with like missing shirt or something, which there are people in San Francisco like that. You're like, my God, like he's got a pair of trousers and that's it, you know? As long as you look fairly respectable, you will be admitted in the space because it is zoned as public. The city has put it in the conditions of the lease. It must be public. They even put up conditions saying the trees must be kept alive, right? Because if they died, you have to replace them. Because they were so worried that the client was going to concrete over the place as soon as the plants have died, you know. This is to be compared with like the walkie-talkie tower in London, where Raphael Vignoli put the Sky Garden at the top and said it's a public space. And this is how they convinced the city to build this massive tower. Oh yeah, it's massive, it's got a public space at the top. Right, but you need to book online before going, right? So who's going to do that? You and me, yes. Poor people, people who are not in the know, homeless people, they're not going to do that. So there are many ways in which a developer can create barriers, but the best way to eliminate barriers remains to keep everything on what we call in French the floor for cows, right? Which means the ground, you know. Keep it on the ground, then everyone can just wander in. They don't have to go through a door. Doors will scare some people. Elevators will scare some people. Not because they're scared of elevators, they're going to be like, oh, this looks too expensive for me, so I'm not going to go. Does that make sense? Yeah. You can only do your best as an architect, huh? The client is the client. They have the money. You're just their advisor. If they really want to turn this thing into horror, you know, you can walk away from the project. That's the ultimate bluff. right? Or the ultimate sacrifice. Otherwise, you just have to work with them. Well, one last maybe?
Do you still play video games? What games do you, if so, what games do you play? If not, what are what other games have you enjoyed in the past?
Yeah, well, I still play them occasionally, but I can't give a proper cultured answer to that because there are many, many wonderful games out there, and I don't know them. Like, one of my flatmates was playing this game called Detroit, which is all about, zombies in Detroit, but the whole game is created as a movie, and it's extremely beautiful and detailed and rich. It's not about zombies, it's about robots that become humans. But I don't know them enough. I spent so many years trying to know how to use the architectural software that I didn't have the time to use the games. Sorry.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.